All right, let's talk about Through the Smoke. Um, this wasn't originally supposed to be an EP. I was originally, before things started going technically wrong, going to release one of these songs each Friday in the week of the last week of May 2020. But yeah, that didn't work out, and when that didn't work out, I thought I might as well group them into an EP, because what these 5 songs have in common is a little bit unusual in depth for the stuff I usually write, in darkness, and pushing introspection, just challenging, empathizing with addictions and depression and stuff like that, just to push people to think outside their bubble. Ironically, I wrote all this stuff a year ago, back in summer 2019, thinking everybody just gets stuck inside their own routines, and it becomes so normal that you don't really necessarily pause to question, is what you're doing, do you have purpose, do you have identity, is this working, is there any joy in this, or does it just continually perpetuate hopelessness? So I wanted to push people to do some introspection. Little did I know that the year that would actually come to fruition would be the year of COVID, and people are now have had plenty of introspection time, and like, not even to mention Black Lives Matter and everything like that. So context of when this is actually getting released is much different than when I wrote it, but it doesn't mean that it's not relevant or anything. It's just amusing, more or less, that the whole thing was meant to be an exercise in introspection, and there's been no lack of introspection recently. But yeah, I wrote this EP, and again, it wasn't meant to be an EP, but these songs kind of come out of a general stem of the human nature has both light and darkness in it, but the darkness can become overwhelming and dominant. And when you look at natural human defense mechanisms, a lot of them are not actually, as much as they're supposedly psychologically for our protection, they're actually not. Most of them just build denial, and denial doesn't ever solve any problems. It just hides them. And the more you hide your problems, the more they just grow inside you until you slowly deteriorate. It's like cancer. So ignoring cancer doesn't get rid of it. It just, you ignore it until you're in uncontrollable pain, headed towards death. So that was what the whole point of this was the EP kind of looks at the toxicity of human nature and defense mechanisms that come naturally, that we're so fast to justify, that just kill us. So looking at addictions, depression, bad habits, things like this, that when left to themselves ultimately just lead to hopelessness and darkness. And as much as the EP itself doesn't really answer any of those questions, it just pushes the thought process in each person who's listening to its life, of looking at their own lives a bit and thinking, okay, does the way I'm living, the decisions I'm making, does any of it actually make sense? Is there hope in it? Is there light in it? Where is this leading me? Is there any joy in my life? What is purpose? What is identity? The EP doesn't inherently answer these questions, but hopefully it pushes people to ask them. And I'll get more into the topics discussed in the EP later, in discussion on social media, but yeah, that was where the EP came from. It was just this exercise in introspection in the darkness of especially defense mechanisms of broken human nature. So that was where it came from, and the title Through the Smoke, which is not related to any particular song on the EP at all, is basically just a metaphor where the word feeling and feel and all this stuff comes up a lot in the EP, and I've suffered with this a lot in the past. I'm sure everybody has, where at times what you feel is so strong that truth disappears. And feelings are not, feelings are like a thermometer of how you're doing in your soul, in your psychology, whatever. But they're not actually necessarily true. You know what I mean? So feelings and truth don't necessarily have anything to do with each other. And unfortunately, culture in general globally seems to be swaying towards putting an emphasis on feelings, how you feel, that is so strong that what is actually true disappears. And if your experience equals truth, it becomes a very dangerous place very quickly that doesn't actually have anything to do with reality. It's just this pit, or this place, again, of denial. So the title Through the Smoke is basically what I was after with that, is when the fire of this broken world and our broken nature is burning, and we're stuck in the middle of that situation. The smoke is so thick that it can be difficult to see through the smoke. And it doesn't mean that there isn't truth on the other side. It just means that we're so caught up in our own pain and brokenness that we can't necessarily see that through the smoke. And ironically, Acting Fools, I'll talk about that in a second. Acting Fools came out of a discussion that was born, it was when the Amazon, summer 2019, the Amazon had been burning for weeks and no one was talking about it yet. And it didn't get talked about until there was smoke billowing over Rio. And I was hanging out with my buddy Khalil. I'll talk about this more later. But talking about this and the irony of, I mean, it's been in California constantly, but last year was also the Australian bushfires and stuff like this that were just out of control. And so the whole fire analogy both worked, speaking to what I was just speaking to, but also looking at, like, our world is a mess. And it's hard and it's real, but what are we going to do? Because we can't change the world by pointing fingers and screaming things. We can only change the world, basically like Gandhi was saying, in looking at ourselves and asking, okay, what can I do with my life? How do I be intentional? How do I love people? And that comes through asking a lot of questions around identity and purpose, or else you don't have answers to any of that stuff. All you have is blame and finger pointing and anger and emotion that doesn't actually lead to anything other than more conflict and hate and brokenness. So yeah, the whole global deterioration geologically, and the whole metaphorical side through the smoke. That's where the name came from. Now we'll talk about Acting Fools, I guess. So yeah, Acting Fools. I was hanging out with my buddy Khalil Sebi. He's the guy who plays the incredible guitar solo in the middle track, Do You Ever Feel Like? Yeah, we were hanging out at the saloon in Seuss before a gig, and just talking about a lot of stuff, really, but it turned into this deep discussion of purpose and purpose in brokenness, purpose in pain, purpose in a fallen world, basically. And I went home from that and took everything that conversation became and put it into a Facebook post. And that Facebook post, the more I looked at it, the more I was like, this can be a song. And I made a video talking about my songwriting process, but basically I manipulated that into what was verse 1 of Acting Fools. It was just a Facebook post. And then I wrote the second verse around the whole concept of the way people face situations these days is so toxic, in that people aren't humble when they do it. They're so fast to play the victim and point fingers at the bad guy, that there is no room for empathy. Everybody's yelling, everybody's being defensive. It doesn't create change, it doesn't create love, it doesn't create empathy, it creates passive aggression, or aggression, actually. People are so fast to blame and point fingers that they're not willing to look at themselves first. And for some reason, when people feel like they are the victim, they feel like they have the right to do whatever they want. And ironically, they usually become hypocrites, doing the same things they're accusing people of because, well, they did it first. Well, you did it second, so you're equally as guilty. So that's what the second verse was about. And the third verse is self-explanatory. But yeah, that song, I don't rap. I'll rap along to songs. I like rap. I mean, you know, I grew up listening to some stuff, like Linkin Park song comes on, for example. I'm going to rap all those lyrics. Anyway, stuff like that. I grew up rapping along with stuff, but I'm not a rapper by any means. The only reason I did that is it was so many lyrics that it wasn't possible to do it in any other way. But intentionally made that whole beat very disjointed to be uncomfortable. Didn't tune a lot of the melodical stuff just to create dissonance. And then when I had a rough demo together, Corey Clark hit it with those guitar slides and the crazy glitchy delay stuff in the chorus. Turned into a pretty cool song. I was especially really happy with what Corey did. So yeah, that's Acting Fools. Feels So Good. Again, that's it was a fun song to make, and it was funny because you could get, by the time you get to the end, it becomes a little bit chaotic, which I didn't mind because the whole thing, like I said in Acting Fools, the whole thing that this fictional but not so fictional character is doing is he's just clubbing and material and sex and whatever, all these things to distract himself from the fact that he feels broken in silence. So the end of that song of Feels So Good is intentionally the farthest thing from silence as possible as far as just layers. But the other reason that all those layers happened was because the more I did stuff, the more I just had other melodical ideas and things and elements that would all fit together and just couldn't stop. Even like all the vocal layers and stuff, I was just having fun. So it worked out. But yeah, Corey on guitar, Corey on bass, killed it. But yeah, it feels so good generally. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's just, like I said, it's this guy who represents a pretty, as much as he's richer in the song, obviously, than the average person is. You know, I know a lot of people who do that. They go through their lives and they hate their jobs and they don't really have any joy or peace. They just keep busy and focusing on image and feeling good to try to achieve purpose and identity, but it doesn't work, and they know it doesn't work. And the more they try to fill the hole with those things, and those things don't fill the hole, they don't look for other answers. They just keep adding more and more of that stuff, and it just leads to more and more dissonance with reality. So that's what that song is. And even the chord progression, I tried to choose something that, as much as the whole song sounds like it's supposed to sound happy, the chord progression itself isn't quite happy. So the whole thing of Feels So Good, it feels so good, you could tell he's telling himself that, but he doesn't really believe it. So that's what I was trying to do with Feels So Good. Do you ever feel like, this is like I mentioned in the beginning, talking about general stuff, of when feelings become so strong that we lose track of reality, we can get in some pretty deep holes of destructive lives. And I mean, Acting Fools is just a social commentary, basically, but this is the only song on the EP that is written from my own perspective. And not my own perspective in that I live in this place, but if things get out of control, these are the lies that can begin to fill my head, that if I don't take those lies and hold them accountable to truth, they become very destructive very quickly. So, yeah, do you ever feel like all those things are things that I've felt? And I'm sure I wrote the song that way because I'm sure other people have felt exactly the same things, where you pour yourself into something, especially when you pour yourself into loving people and doing things to love people, and it all falls apart and you're the one who's left hurt. And it's very difficult to ask questions of, was it worth it? And am I doomed to fail everything that I touch? And as much as in the brokenness of human nature on itself, yes, somewhat. But it doesn't mean that there aren't answers to that. It doesn't mean that there isn't hope. It doesn't mean that there isn't truth. And those are the things that get lost super quickly when you just begin to let those feelings take over and that darkness take over, which again leads into a lot of the addictions and depression and things that the rest of the album talks about, to try to hide those things. So the song, Do You Ever Feel Like, is pretty central to what goes wrong. I mean, as much as we're obviously broken, Do You Ever Feel Like shows how those lies can just become so dominant that we no longer look for hope and we no longer look for light necessarily. We just are consumed in hopelessness. But that's not the answer if we, again, are able to look at what is on the other side of the smoke. Yes, we feel these things. The feelings are real. The feelings aren't invalid. And there are things to assess. There are things to analyze. You're foolish if you don't do that. But at the end of the day, there is stuff beyond the smoke. It's just difficult to see when you're so deep in feeling those things. So that's what I tried to accomplish in Do You Ever Feel Like? Corey, weeping guitar solo behind, Khalil playing that killer guitar solo. Both of them killed it. This is an odd one in that it's just kind of a long train of thought with an epic guitar solo in the middle of it for a minute. That I had fun. I also had a ton of fun making all of the symphonic piano, lots of stuff behind that guitar solo. The thing I'll add here is that one of the most sad things in this whole EP and my whole first wave of releases is that I don't have my drums. They're on the other side of the world, and I'm primarily a drummer, and it's been torture programming drums and playing MIDI drums, trying to get acoustic dynamics, spending hours messing with velocities, trying to humanize stuff and dragging stuff off the grid so that it sounds like it's actually me playing as much as possible, but you just can't achieve it. And this is one of those songs where it's just like, oh man, I wish I just could have actually played those drums on that solo, but you do what you can with what you got. That's all we can ever do, and 2020 just kind of is what life always is, just more obviously. So yeah, it's been sad to not have my drums. Random note. Medusa actually came out of an odd little conversation where I have a friend, I'll put the picture up in a second here. I have a friend who is an absolutely incredible artist, and he went through quite a phase where he was just drawing about a year ago. And one of the things he drew was this portrait of Medusa that didn't look so horrifying as the typical portrayal of Medusa. And she actually looked kind of sad in the picture. And it made me think, oh, this Medusa has something about her that you don't really think of when you think of Medusa. And I realized that I didn't actually know anything about the myth of Medusa other than generally. And I looked it up, and yeah, it was mostly stuff I knew. But there was also an alternative version written by Outlnd, much later, that was interesting. And I mean, we're already talking about a myth, so who knows how much validity is based way back. You know, like, stories have to come from somewhere, but where those stories came from. So we are already talking about a myth and taking it hundreds of years later, thousands, I don't remember, and changing the story. There's obviously no validity left in this, but it was interesting. In that Ovid's version, Medusa is more of a sad victim who just keeps having things go wrong again and again, and it ends up with the story that's in the song. So when I saw that, I had this train of thought of just like, I've always thought of Medusa as like this really evil, horrific monster, and as much as like it's not the original myth or whatever, the version painted by Ovid is totally different. And it was an interesting train of thought in basically misjudgment, and how if we get something in our heads about someone, we can have a perspective that's totally not fair. And the more that perspective plays out, the harder it is to reverse that perspective. But also realistically, and I've been through this a ton, is the more someone is misjudged, the less energy the person who's misjudged has to bother correcting the misjudgment. The deeper it gets, the more people agree with the misjudgment. It's hard to have the energy to face that. So that's kind of what I was trying to capture in Medusa. Again, Corey on guitars in the song. Awesome stuff. Yeah. And finally, Is There Any Light? made two kind of fictional characters. The first character who's fictional is hundreds of girls I've met. Not quite to the same degree, but more or less hundreds of girls I've met who live in that circle. And back when I used to work in an old job in Canada, I met a couple people who had stories similar to the second verse, the guy in that story. But the whole point of that song is two people coming from two totally different situations, crying out the same question in the chorus. So both of them go through their whole situation, and then both of them are left asking, is there any hope? Is there any light? Looking at, okay, all this stuff has happened to me. That's real. That has real consequences. But does that doom and define me to always be how I feel victimized? The hopelessness that I feel, is what has happened the end of hope? Do I have to embody what has gone wrong in my life? And then it's pretty raw, and they're the kind of questions that people ask before they self-destruct, whatever that means. Is if you get to the point where you can no longer be in denial anymore, where all of the things in acting fools and feels so good fall apart, and you're just left with things like, do you ever feel like? And this song is just, when you can't hide anymore, you have to ask these questions eventually. And I don't answer the questions in the song, but the whole thing, again, is, can you see through the smoke? Are you still, despite all of the pain that all of us have to some degree, we've all been through stuff. It's just part of living in this world that, as much as some people have been through better and worse stuff, everybody has to face what it means to be human. And ask these questions at some point, and how we answer them is critical. Is there light or is there darkness? I mean, not is there light, is there darkness? Obviously there's, both, but some people get to the point where they don't even see the light. They don't believe in the light in the darkness of the smoke. So I don't answer the question particularly in the song, but I do end it on a major chord resolve after a whole minor song. So I meant to quietly say, like, yes, there is hope. Yes, there is light. Obviously, there's these things. Otherwise, those things wouldn't exist in the world at all. If everything was hopelessness and dark, what is the origin of good? What is the origin of hope? Why is there this thing in us that wants better if all there is nihilism? If all there is Nietzsche? If all there is similar to the Buddhist concept of nirvana, which is the best thing you can achieve is to stop being reincarnated into suffering, to cease to exist. It's the same resolution as Nietzsche, except Buddhism is a spiritual resolution and Nietzsche is kill yourself and end suffering. If the whole purpose of life was there is nothing other than suffering and the best thing you can do is end it, the existence itself is a self-contradictory. It's self-contradictory. So that's kind of where I was going with this whole thing, is just light and good has to have an origin. That a lot of macro philosophies, especially that are held by people in depression, in addictions, in suffering, hold that all there is suffering, all there is pain, I just want out. It doesn't account for hope. It doesn't account for any of that. So that's what I was trying to do with that, was just to push people to ask, is all there is darkness? And the answer should be no. And then the whole question of what does that mean? And what does that mean for the choices I continue to make? Do I continue to live in addictions and things that just keep my cycles of depression? Do I continue the things that leave me with this lack of real purpose, this lack of identity that brings no joy, only pain? What does answering those questions look like? How do you even approach that? Obviously, you need humility to even begin to ask those questions, let alone answer them. But yeah, that was where I wanted to leave the end of the album, was ultimately this place of asking, okay, this is the situation of darkness that we as broken humans have to deal with, but is there any light, and what does that mean? And to begin asking those questions. So yeah, and finally, again, Corey in the song killed it. And just to wrap it up, also Jericho. Jericho did all the mixing on after I finished prod and arrangements and stuff. Jericho did all of the mixing on the instrumental stuff and back vocals and stuff. Killed it. And then Max, I've got both their information in the bottom. Max did specifically the vocals, which quality hasn't been that great, and he's just been killing it considering that quality hasn't been that great. He mixed the vocals into it, and then Riley did the final mastering, and yeah, awesome job by everybody. Very appreciative. And yeah, this EP's been a long time coming, a lot of technical problems. I recorded the whole EP, so I wrote it a year ago in 2019, summer 2019. All of these songs came out around then, lyrically. I recorded all of the music, arranged, wrote all that stuff in about 2 to 3 weeks in January and February. Realized my sound card was garbage, had to wait. My brother bought me a new sound card, audio interface. It was awesome. Was just about to be able to keep working, and I got COVID and had to wait basically 2.5 months till my lungs were fully recovered to do the EP properly. Did recordings, they still weren't good enough. Borrowed my aunt's mic, did recordings again. Had to do some of those again because by the end of recording the whole EP in one day, my voice was tired. So I did some songs again the next week. There were a couple botch mixing jobs along the way, just because quality, stuff like that. So this EP has been a long, frustrating process, and it's a relief to finally be here. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it.